Hello, hello. So we're going to pick up with September 17th, 2001. And based on the date, you can probably guess what this is going to be about. Why terror always fails. On the eve of the Jewish New Year, I, like so many of us, am still in a state of shock. As long as I live, I'll never forget those television pictures of a nightmare become real, including last night's aerial views of the full extent of the devastation. We've seen the very worst in humanity, a brutal act of naked evil. But we've also seen the very best in countless acts of support and human kindness. And today, we'll see the sheer power of human resilience as people follow President Bush's call to return to work and reconnect with normal life again. That is why acts of terror, though they succeed for a moment, always fail in the end. Those who commit them believe they can create panic and fear. But after the initial shock, free human beings don't react with panic and fear. Their response is to try to help, to rescue, to comfort, to heal. Will we ever forget those passengers on the fourth plane who fought with the hijackers at the certain cost of their own lives to save the lives of the people on the ground? Will we ever forget those last telephone messages of love from those who knew they were about to die? Or the tidal wave of shared emotion as people heard the news and were instantly united with the injured and bereaved in grief and prayer? Or the tears shed at the first funerals over the weekend as firemen mourned their colleagues who gave their lives to rescue others? If ever we sought proof of the power of the human spirit, it's been there, in the bond of solidarity and compassion that, from New York to New Zealand, turns strangers into friends and bystanders into a single extended family. It's as if the world had put its arms around America and given it comfort in the hour of its grief. And in that moment, a new hope was born, that together we can defeat the forces of death and find a way, however painful and difficult, to a new affirmation and defense of life. And when last Wednesday I stood together with Muslim and Christian leaders expressing our grief and our joint commitment to peace, I knew just this, that love is stronger than hate, freedom more powerful than its enemies, and the human spirit too resilient to be intimidated for long. And so I pray, in words adapted from the liturgy of the new year, O God of life, whose gift is life, be with us now and in the coming year, giving us the courage to affirm and cherish life. Yeah.
Wow. Can I ask you a question?
Go for it.
Do you remember when Osama bin Laden was killed?
I do.
What did you feel like when you heard that?
So I think, what year was that? Was that 2008 or later? What year was that?
I think it was a little later.
Yeah, 12.
Something
I don't
like
remember.
that.
I was around 10. So
Yeah.
I saw on my computer and whatever, I saw this news and all these things, and I saw Osama bin Laden killed, and that was everywhere. I'm like, okay,
Right.
I recognize that name, but I don't know, maybe I was just an ignorant 10-year-old. I didn't really know who it was. So I went to my parents. I'm like, do you see this on the news? And they're like, I think so. And I opened up, and they're like, yeah. And I'm like, who is that? And they confirmed, like, oh, that's the guy they were looking for, who who destroyed the Twin Towers. So I do remember the day he was killed. Yeah.
So I remember it a little differently. I remember having a clearer picture of like what Al Qaeda was. I remember like hearing Obama get on the news and like say that he had been killed or neutralized or whatever he said. And I remember sort of thinking like, I sort of felt like everyone else was thinking that like, and me too, I was included in everyone else. But like everyone kind of thought that like, that was almost the end of terror. Like everyone was like, okay, Al Qaeda's over. We're done. We're safe. Everyone's safe. I don't know. I've been shown a lot recently how naive I've been.
Yeah.
And that's one of those times that I think the whole world kind of was almost like taken advantage of in a way.
So that reminded me of a few things, especially with current events. What was it? I read The Case for Israel by Alan Dershowitz, and he spoke about terror and why it just doesn't stop. If the world is against it, why doesn't it stop? And his answer in his book, and he explains it, and I don't remember it so well, but I remember the general idea, is that it works. Terror accomplishes the goal. You get people, you do what you do, and somewhere, and there will be millions of people on your side. There will be millions of people trying to appease you. There will be millions of people sending you money, even though you use it for missiles. they do it because it works. How we change that, I'm not so sure. But terror, I don't know. I think was that the first big terroristic, was that when terror was born, 2001? I don't know.
I don't know if that's when terror was born. I think that's a little.
That's when that kind of thing.
That was
For example,
the first
airport
instance.
security wasn't a thing until 2001.
No, but I mean, like people talk about. I don't know what else terrorism would be. I mean, could you say the Holocaust was an act of terror?
That was
All of
genocide.
the pogroms, but like, what's like,
I
where do
guess
you draw
technologically
the
advanced
line?
terror.
People, it was American terror was the thing. It was the first act of terrorism on American soil. No one talks about
Actually,
what terrorism was before that, but it has
yeah.
to have existed.
Actually, Rabbi Sachs, you just reminded me, Rabbi Sachs spoke about that in one of his books, Essays on Ethics, maybe, that America never experienced something like Al Qaeda until that day, because
Right.
it was always a logical war. If there was a war, it's because you had conflicting values, or you had conflicting ideas of things you wanted to accomplish, and most often you can come to a compromise. But when there's a group of people that aren't looking for compromises, but they're looking for you to be gone, that's terror. That's something different. And that was the first time in America that we saw a other side who didn't even want to compromise.
Right. And deal in absolutes. Something you spoke about, right? Maybe not this, but I remember we talked about dealing in absolutes. Maybe Rabbi Sachs, one of his other books, talks about absolutes. Now, when you deal in absolutes, there's no room for compromise, and that leads to conflict.
Also, it's a similar vein with the absolute thing. There's modern behavioral cognitive therapy talks about not living in absolutes. Like one of the key things that contribute to anxiety, like you have generalization and catastrophization and I don't know the word. That may have been catastrophizing. That's it. And absolutes. How it's not. If you look at everything as either yes or no, you're gonna have issues because every single thing is nuanced. Like even like there are people. We'll keep it vague for the recording, but people who support the current president may not appreciate his Israel activity as much as a different president. There is no yes or no or full support or everything has its pieces. And if you look at something without the pieces, then you're going to run into issues. But that's just an idea on the absolutes.
Yeah. And it's hard to get out of that mindset of those expectations and only dealing in that. Like it's hard to understand that that's not how you should think. I think like that all the time. You don't even realize, Yeah.
We have one video going around today that really made, I think he talks about how in times of hardship, you see the best in people. One video I saw going around today was in Load. There were issues like yesterday or 2 days ago.
Yeah.
But then today you had the Chabad mitzvah tank driving around playing songs, and you had random Jews just circle dancing to bring up the spirits. I thought that was really
so
manifested this.
I think what's interesting about the conflict right now in Israel is that everyone believes that they're like more than anything else. I think people are trying to help people. The people who are arguing for the sake of the Palestinians, yeah, they've been oppressed to an extent. They're not treated as well as they should be. They do want them just to be treated well. That like they are trying to help people. Is what I think a lot of Jews are not understanding. Is that they are just trying to help. They just don't understand the full magnitude of the situation. Whereas the Jews also are trying to help the Jews in Israel, and everyone really just wants to be helping, and no one I think really knows how to help and how to build a better situation.
One thing that I find that people have issues with is that they agree that Palestinians deserve better in one way or another. But whenever that idea is brought about, whenever it's made clear, whenever like the issue in Shimon HaTzadik or Sheikh Jarrah, that's not a clear-cut issue. But as soon as you start shooting missiles at millions of people, you you lose support because that's terror. like the BBC interviewed someone today. I don't remember his name, but they even asked him about this. He said the BBC was a little hostile towards him, and they asked this guy who was representing Israel. He said no. When Hamas started by shooting rockets at us, then we have to respond. And then BBC was like, well, that's not how it started. It started in Sheikh Jarrah. That's what started this whole issue. And he's like, okay, that's a conversation that we can have, a very different conversation. And we can talk about Israel and their court system and what's happening in the court system and whether it's right or wrong. Or we can talk about terror. And you brought me here to talk about terror. And that's a whole different conversation. So as soon as you bring in, I want to kill as many people as I can because that's what I live for or die for, then you lose support.
Yeah. The problem is that they haven't lost support.
They lose some support. Like for example, people like me and you may have supported the Palestinians, not I guess in ways that they need better. But when I don't know, when terror gets in, it becomes polarized.
The problem also is that people think the Israelis are the terrorists. They see only that Israel fired back, that we targeted these sites that had children on them, and people died. Israel killed people. Yes, they did. But there's more to it than that. It's, I think, where people get in trouble. Is not seeing the rest of it.
There's a lot to be seen.
There always is.
there's just so many aspects to this one, and hopefully all that calms down. Yeah. With that, I think we should move on to the next one.
Okay.
So the blame game from December 18th, 2000. Oh dear, here we go again, taking part in the nation's favorite indoor sport. Who is to blame? This time, the subject is law and order in the wake of the tragic Damilola killing, the continuing echoes of the Macpherson report, and various accusations and counter-accusations that have been flying around for the past few days. So this book talks about some current events, but he gets into a more general idea as we go. So if we don't fully understand what he's talking about right now, it shouldn't really make a difference.
Do you know what he's talking about?
No.
I don't. Okay.
No.
Fine. So we'll keep going.
Something that happened. Yeah. Something that happened in Britain 20 years ago. Some blame the media, others blame society. For some, it's all the fault of a liberal elite. For others, it's the fault of an authoritarian counter-elite. And of course, everyone blames the police for being too tough or not tough enough, too politically correct or incorrect. It all reminds me of the Bible teacher who spent a year trying to teach a rather rowdy class the book of Joshua. And at the end of it, he asked the simplest question he could think of. Tell me, who destroyed the walls of Jericho? And from the back of the room, little Marvin put up his hand and said, please, sir, it wasn't me. That's the essence of the blame game. Whatever's going wrong, it's someone else's fault. Please, sir, it wasn't me. In fact, the Bible has a profound commentary on this because the blame game is the oldest human story of all. It begins with the first man and woman together in paradise. The first thing God tells them is not to eat a certain fruit. And of course, the first thing they do is to eat it. And when God asks what's going on, the man blames the woman blames the serpent, and the result is that they all get thrown out of Eden. Please, sir, it wasn't me. It's the quickest route to paradise lost. What's fascinating is that in the very next verse, Adam turns to his wife and gives her a new name, Eve, because she is the mother of all life. My interpretation of that verse is this. At first, Adam was distraught because he thought he just lost immortality. He would no longer live forever. But then he realized, no, that's not so. I can live on, not in myself, but through my children. But having children is not something I can do alone. That is only something I can do in partnership with my wife. He stopped blaming her and instead began to see that they could create something lasting, but only together. That's the only way we can fight and defeat crime, together, as families and communities, not blaming the police, but helping them, because neither they nor we can do it alone. Okay.
There's a lot to be said about that.
Which part? Which part?
All of it. And it's all so relevant today, which is crazy because it was 20 years ago. I don't want to talk about police. There's a lot. I don't know very much. I like the idea of coming together as family and community.
Yeah, that reminded me of something that we heard in Israel.
What did it remind you of?
By one of our apartment mates, actually.
Which one? You don't have to say which one. What was it?
Basically, he gave it to our Torah at some point, and it was about the half shekel and how everyone gave a half shekel because they needed to be counted and they all got to contribute, and that was a great way to do it. But why specifically a half shekel? Why not just do a whole shekel instead of and just count them like that? Like you just get some more money, and it's an easy way to count. And what he shared was that it kind of showed something special about the Jewish people. That yeah, we can contribute on our own, and we can give stuff alone, and we can do whatever we want, and we can be great if we try. But you need two halves to make a whole. When you have people coming together to contribute, that contribution will be much greater than just a single contribution alone.
And also, right, is half a shekel so that everyone could contribute, right?
Makes it easier.
Equality. You know, everyone gets the same opportunity. Everyone's fulfilling the same mitzvah and being counted exactly the same. You know, the people who can't, afford to give more than that don't have to give more than that. And even the people who can afford to give more than that don't need to because it's not important.
Yeah.
Have you seen that graphic? It's two people, one, and there's a tree in the middle, right? And it says like it has 4 panels, and it explains like different forms of equality. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yes.
And then
Equality
like
and equity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
That. Yeah. I thought that was really interesting.
Equality is everyone getting the same, and equity is everyone getting what they need.
Yeah.
One thing that I find there are a lot of things that we can do alone. But is there anything that we can do better alone than with a partner? With some help with a team?
It's an interesting question. I don't personally, there's a lot of stuff that I would rather work alone on.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know if I could necessarily do it better alone. But it's more of an individual project. Like I built a bench last summer.
I knew that.
Would the bench have been better had I had some help with some, a mentor who knew more about building benches? Probably. Was it my project that I wanted to work on and I wanted to do and learn from myself? Yes. It was. That's not the question, I guess.
Well, it's some things you can, depending on what your goal is, you can do more with a help or more on your own.
Right.
I think one thing in the chapter that was very relevant is the blame game. Everyone does it.
Yeah.
How often do you blame me for your problems?
All the time, every day, Mikey.
Every day
something goes wrong, I'm like, oh, Mikey, come on.
I know.
Yeah.
I do the same thing, but
there is always someone though
Like there was a water main break in Fairlawn. I'm like, Noah.
Yeah, right. No, but there is always someone, like there's always that one friend that like, you're like, we're just gonna blame you for everything. Like, okay, and it's a joke, but like I think to an extent it does help to have someone like, even as a joke, I think it helps to have someone to just like throw all your problems at.
I was playing softball like last week with for the first time in a while. I showed up a
Nice.
little late because I was in the middle of stuff. But
Mikey,
what?
showed up late. Come on.
It was fine. I still was the best. And then I showed up and I just noticed there was this one guy on the team everyone was making fun of. And I went to him, I'm like, when did you get chosen as a target? And I'm just, it was an interesting thing to see.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think the purpose of the blame game is really interesting too. It's not just to have someone to blame, it's to shift the responsibility off of yourself. Right. So if I, show up late to class or something or practice or whatever, um, you know, I can show up and I can say, hey, professor, I'm sorry I was late. I got stuck in traffic. I, didn't like, I can either blame it on other circumstances, or I can say, I messed up. I'm sorry. I'm here now. What do you want me to do? And like my professors, at least, at camp, at summer camp, they said, we're training you to be professionals. If you're going to be late, fine. And it happens. Life happens. Be professional. Text us, email us, let us know you're not coming. Right. And that way, I think you can still accept responsibility, but at a low consequence. I think that's what people are afraid of, is the consequences. You lose respect, you lose time and energy and whatever, making excuses. No one likes to hear excuses. But at the same time, it's so hard to not make excuses. I can make up reasons all day for why I failed, my skiing exam, per se. Say, oh, my boots are too big. They were a little too big. Is that the reason I failed? Maybe. Or maybe it just wasn't good enough. I can either choose to shift it or accept the responsibility and accept the fact that I failed and move on and get better and try again next year.
One thing that Rabbi Sachs talks about a lot that I really like is he talks about guilt versus shame. How Judaism tries to push us to guilt over shame, while society pushes us to shame over guilt. And this is the difference. Shame is when you do something wrong, you did something, you are wrong. It's a stain on you because you made yourself worse by doing that thing. So how do you hide it up? You try to cover it. You make sure no one knows. You don't want to be responsible. You don't want to be accountable. You want to push it away, blame someone else, or hide it in some way. Because if not, people will shame you. They'll make you feel bad about yourself. They will push away from you. But you don't feel any moral responsibility. You just want to get rid of others' eyes on you. But when it comes to guilt, that is not about shame. It's not you are bad now. It's you did something bad, but you are still good. And when you have something like that, people aren't really calling you out for it because it's not you. You're not getting publicly shamed, but you feel morally responsible and accountable because you know you did something wrong, but you know you have the power to be good. And I think that is a big idea of the blame game. Clearly, we see in Breshit and throughout history that blame is not good. Maybe Breshit is the story that God is telling us blame is not good. And maybe through that, we're seeing shame is not good. But I think all of these stories coming together about the issues of blaming others and not being accountable and not being responsible is the idea of seeing shame is not something we support. Public shaming is not good because people are good. Acts can be wrong, but people are good and they always are. They always can't have the power to be good. You are not permanently stained by the acts you do. And through that, we should move towards a guilt culture, that we feel bad, we feel responsible, and we feel the need to always be better.
Can I share with you an idea from Netanya and also Ori Moscow?
Go for it.
So when I was learning Tanya with him and Noah Levin over the summer, we talked about the idea of sin, Even in sin, right? In chet, there's an aleph at the end. What's that aleph there for? Doesn't need to be there, right? Have you heard this before? No?
No.
So even in the sin, right, you could just have the chaftet, and chet, fine, cool. The aleph is there to symbolize the fact that Hashem is with you even in sin. You can look at that one of two ways. Either, you sin in the privacy of your home, and Hashem is still there watching. There is still someone watching. It's not just you. You're not alone. But also, even in sin, Hashem is there with you. And there's, a way to turn it around. A way for you to kind of, express that it was an act of bad, not that you're bad, like you were saying. I thought it was a really interesting piece that Ori shared with me and Noah.
Yeah,